Hey there internets, I'm Michael and this is Toucan Play That Game, bringing you our tutorial video teaching you how to play Roll for the Galaxy by Rio Grande Games. So what is Roll for the Galaxy? Well, let's take a look at the cover. So we've got a space scene here with a sun silhouetted behind a moon or something, some ships, some guy working on it, some Borg vessels. It's a Star Trek game. Cool. Hang on, I don't remember the Borg having orange glowing circles on them or diamonds. So what is it? Well, it is a space game, unfortunately not Star Trek. But the nature of the game is kind of chucking dice to build up your empire and be the biggest, baddest guys in the galaxy. So it is a bit like the Borg in that respect. Now, the way this all works stems from a game called Race for the Galaxy, and that's why it's called Roll for the Galaxy, which doesn't make a huge amount of sense. Race for the Galaxy makes a lot more sense. That was a card game and was slightly on the complex side. This is a streamlined, more fun-inducing, because everyone enjoys chucking dice, game that involves simultaneous play in order to buy new tiles that make up your kingdom. Each tile has different costs, and at the end of the game, whoever has the most points will win that game. So why don't we take it to the table and I can show you in more detail how to play Roll for the Galaxy. The aim of the game is to have the most points at the end of the game, which is triggered by either using up all of the victory points that you have in the centre of the table here, or one person building their 12th tile, which does include your starting 3 tiles, so 9 in addition to those. So to set the game out, you'll want to put all your dice in the middle of the table. You'll also want to put out the phase tiles here. These are double-sided. One side doesn't have the X on, one side does. So make sure you put them with the X side face up. Then you'll need to put a number of victory points depending on the number of players in the centre of the table. So we've done a 2-player game here, which is 24 victory points. And it's 12 per player, so it goes up to 60 for a 5-player game. You'll also need in the centre of the table this big bag filled with these tiles. Then give each player one of these plastic dice cups, the credit marker that matches that colour, which will then sit on the $1 of the player mat. So you'll also need each player to have one of these player mats. Also, give each player one of these screens that they'll be able to use to hide their dice rolls. Then also give them one of these phase strips that they'll be using to select the phases each round. Then randomly give each player one of these starting faction tiles. So these are the dual ones that are blank on the back. And they also have these greyed out corners, so you know they're starting factions. So just randomly shuffle them up and then give one to each player. They'll also need one of these starting worlds. So these are much like the tiles that are in the bag to draw, except for they're blank on one side. And again, these have the greyed out corners. So just randomly shuffle these up and give one to each player. This forms the player's starting tableau of worlds. Next, each player needs to populate their construction zone with a development and a planet to settle. So get your big bag of tiles and then shuffle it up and draw out 2 random tiles for each player. If this is the first game, you'll need to ensure that you have the lowest value world put on the settlement space and the lowest value development put on the development space. So if we look at these, we've got a 2 and a 5, so the 2 is lower, and the 2 and a 4, so the 2 is lower. So we'd do the 2 value development and the 2 value planet. The final step of setup is to give each player their dice. So each player will start with 5 white dice. 2 will sit in your citizenry here on your player mat. 3 go into your dice. You'll then also gain dice dependent on your developments and worlds. More often it will be the worlds that will give you dice. For instance, this Alien Rosetta Stone world gives you an alien technology yellow die into your citizenry at the start of the game. So we collect a yellow dice and we put it in our citizenry. This player also has the Separatist colony, which gains a military dice, which is a red one, into their cup. So we get a red dice, we drop it in their cup. That's that player all set up. These tiles in the construction zone do not give you any benefits. And that is then the game all set up. So to win the game, you have to have the most victory points. So during the game, you'll be able to collect these victory points from the centre of the table. That's one way to gain victory points. But then also at the end of the game, your various tiles are worth the victory points denoted in the cost. So these ones here are worth 2 each. Additionally, some tiles will give bonus points at the end of the game for certain criteria. And so here is an example of what the table would look like set up for a 2-player game. You'll notice there's a white dice here by the phase tiles that I didn't mention before. This is used only for the 2-player variant. The game is broken down into rounds, which consist of 5 phases, which you can find on your screen. So the first phase is where we'd roll the dice, which are our workers, which will be done behind our screens. We then assign those workers to the various different phases. Then once we've done that, we reveal what our workers are. And in the 2-player mode, during the reveal phase, we will roll this die to potentially have an extra phase. Then we proceed through the phases. After this, we manage our empire. It's important to note here that play is simultaneously, so both players will be rolling their dice at the same time, selecting their phases at the same time, and working through those phases at the same time. So let's start with the first phase. So to roll the dice, you simply get your cup, shake it up, and then behind your screen, tip your dice cup over to reveal your dice. Then we'd move on to the assign phase. So here we have behind my screen, and you can see my phase strip here, and these are the dice that I rolled. So the first thing to do during the assign phase is to put each dice under its corresponding phase that it matches the symbol to. Next, you're going to want to pick a phase you activate. So you select any one of your dice and you may put it in any one of these phases. You'll only be doing this with a single dice, however, and this then will ensure that that phase happens, as only phases that are selected by players will happen in the game. If you have dice under a phase that gets selected, then that dice will count as a worker towards that phase. The dice that you use to select the phase does also count as a worker for that phase. If you have dice under a phase and it's not selected, then this will end up going back into your cup for your next round. So here, let's say I want to do explore. So I'm going to use this ship dice to select explore as my phase. This will now ensure I get to do that explore action, and I'll have 2 workers assigned to it. But what if I wanted another worker? Well, the next thing you can do is you can use reassign powers. So at the start of the game, you will only have one reassign power, which is the dictate power, which is listed on your phase strip here. So this allows you to place a worker here in order to place a different worker under the incorrect column. So for example, where I had selected explore here, I could then use this red settle dice and place it to the right hand side of the board here to indicate that I am using this to dictate that this ship dice be an explore dice. And these are all maze, you don't have to do these powers. And that would then be a roll and reassign completed. We would wait for all players to complete their roll and reassign, which they would be doing simultaneously, but some people will be quicker than others. Then you do the reveal, which is where you simply remove your screen to show what your dice are. So here both players have rolled their dice and assigned them and then revealed what those dice are. So over on the left here, explore was selected. That means we flip over the explore tile so it's not got the X side visible. This represents that that phase is happening this round. Then we look at develop. I obviously only selected explore, not develop, but the other player did select develop. So we'll also flip that. Obviously only 2 phases have been selected because there are only 2 players, but then we need to roll this spare white dice here, and whatever phase that comes up would also be selected. So in this case it's come up with explore, which we already have selected, so we'd only have 2 phases selected. Then simultaneously each player will perform each of these phases. So let's describe a bit about each of these phases. So let's start with the explore action. So when you explore, you may spend one of your workers, which is one of your dice, to your citizenry to either stock, which means you would gain 2 credits, so you simply move 2 spaces up the credit track, or you can expend a worker to scout. So we spend the worker into the citizenry to perform a scout. And that means we can draw a tile from this bag of tiles. We'd then be able to look at both sides of this tile and decide which one we prefer more. Then place it underneath the respective construction zone. So any tiles you already have there get lifted up and it goes underneath them. It does not go on top. Additionally, when doing this explore, say we drew this tile and we did not want this tile, then you can abandon it in order to increase the number of tiles that you draw. To abandon tile, and you can do this with ones that you have in your construction zone as well, and it does not need to be the ones on the top of your construction zone, you simply put it underneath the phase tile and then draw 1 plus the number of abandoned tiles, so in this case 2 tiles, and you would then keep both of these tiles, of course choosing whether you use them as worlds for settling or as developments, and they would then go underneath. If you pick them to be the same thing, so let's say we chose both of these to be developments, we'd of course be able to choose what order they go on the bottom under. Then at the end of the explore round, you would remove all abandoned tiles from under the explore tile and put them back in the bag. Next, let's talk about develop. So develop is where you construct your developments from your player board here. So the number of workers required to construct a development is equal to the number of points the development is worth. So for example, this one is worth 2. However, I didn't put any workers again under develop, so I cannot put any into constructing this development. Also, this dictate dice from reassigning is unused, so goes back in the cup. Any unused dice from here will always go into your cup. It's only when you use them that they then go into your citizenry. So here, this other player did select develop and does have workers to assign. So he'll assign a worker onto that development. once you have a number of dice, aka workers, on there equal to that number, you instantly build that development, which means you add it to your tableau, like so. Let's say that we actually chose settle, and that this player here had 2 dice underneath settle. That would mean that these workers would get placed onto his settlement construction zone. And just like with development, once you have a number of dice equal to the cost, this is then built and those dice go into your citizenry. Now let's talk about the produce phase. So let's say this player here had selected produce. When you do a produce, you will simply place that dice or worker onto a planet. Now, grey planets, such as New Sparta here, where it's circled with grey, cannot have produce. So you cannot place workers from the produce phase onto one of these planets. Any with a colour though, such as this blue one here, you would simply place 1 dice onto that planet. Each planet can only produce once, so you can only have 1 worker on each planet. Next, we'll talk about ship. So ship actually has 2 different options, much like Explore did. So let's say this player has a dice in ship. So the 2 options they have is to trade, which will gain a number of credits depending on the world. And on your player aid screen here, you can see the number of credits you get depends on the colour of the world. So if we did a ship with this player here, he would be using a white dice to ship a white dice off of this blue planet. And a blue planet is worth 3 credits. Brown would be 4, green 5, yellow 6. This represents that they're the rarity of those planets and also the cost of them to actually build. So when you ship, the dice come from your shipping dice and the dice that you'd produced as a good back into your citizenry, and you would gain those credits. The other option you have is we could have had a blue dice on this world here, and then you can do the consume action. So when you do consume, much like with trading, you'll take your shipping dice and you'll take your good off of a world and you'll put them into your citizenry. But rather than gaining credits, you'll be gaining victory points. Now, the number of victory points again is dependent on colour, but this time it's not a case of the different colours being worth more or less, it's about matching the colours of your dice and the world. So in this situation here, we were using a white dice to ship a blue good off of a blue world. So that means that we have 2 matching colours. So we'd get 2 victory points from the centre for doing that. If we had a white dice there, we have no matching colours, so we'd only get 1, because you always get a minimum of 1. If we were shipping a blue good with a blue dice off of a blue world, then we would get 3 victory points. Now, it doesn't matter if it was yellow goods on a yellow world, blue goods on a blue world, you don't get any more for the rarer colours. It's only when you trade that you get more. And that is then all of the different phases. You then manage your empire. So the first thing you'll do is spend credits from your player board here by moving down the track to recruit dice. So what this means is each dice will cost you 1 credit to place it from your citizenry into your cup. So here I have 5 credits and 6 dice. So I'd have to pick 5 of these dice and then I would go down to 0 credits and those would go into my cup. Now, when you get to 0 credits, once you've finished doing your recruit, you then always move back up to 1 credit. So you always have a minimum of 1 credit going into a round. Obviously, if you already had more than 1 credit, you don't gain an extra credit. It just ensures that you're on at least 1. The next thing you can do is you can recall dice. So let's say this player had 1 dice on this development that they were trying to build. They could choose to remove that dice from that development, and they can do the same for any settlements that they're trying to build. Also, where this player has a good on a world from producing, they can choose to recall that dice. Then we would reset the phases. So if we had these 2 selected, we would unselect them by flipping them back to their cross sides. Then you check if any of the game ending conditions have been met. So does anyone have 12 tiles? And the double tile here, despite being a single tile, counts as 2 tiles. So you'll start on 3. If anyone has 12 in front of them, including those, that is then the end of the game and you'll total up scores. Or if you are out of victory points in the centre of the table here, if it's not the end of the game, you then go back to the start of round and you continue playing rounds until it is the end of the game. Then at the end of the game, you'll total up the points given from the different tiles that you have built in front of you, keeping in mind any in your construction zone here do not count. And also you'll total up any benefits that some of the developments might be giving you bonus points for, and also any victory points that you have in front of you that you got from consuming during the course of the game. Whoever has the most is the winner. If you have a tie, then add in the number of dice in your cup and the number of galactic credits that you have on your player board. And whoever has the most then is the winner. If there's still a tie, then the game's a tie. And that is how you play Roll for the Galaxy. I do hope that you've enjoyed this video. Of course, if you have, please do check out the rest of the videos on the channel, subscribe to the channel, share the channel with your friends and family, and also check us out on social media. You can find us on Facebook or on Twitter. And as always, thanks for watching and bye for now.